Well, hello, everybody. Good to see
Hello.
you join. Adrian's coming.
Somebody got started with some wine. I should have had a
Oh,
prop.
this is not virtual. This is
Part of our brand.
Well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, but not here.
well, it's true. We are covering a wide time zone or
Linda, where
crossing.
are you?
I'm actually in Dallas, Texas.
You got
So,
an hour or two to go. Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I'm going to hold out till then.
Thanks for joining.
I wanted to give everybody a little behind the scenes for a second. I had 1 minute to go according to my instructions, and I wanted to tell this story if anybody heard me start it. So during the course of these only 2 days so far, there have been 4 people who had to tend to their older adult loved ones because of caregiving emergencies. And we're talking about our panelists and people behind the scenes and so on. And these are people who have a lot of bandwidth, they have means, they had to do it themselves because they are devoted daughters and devoted sons. And that is the situation in this country. And I often, because my mom did pass, I often wished that I was a caregiver, but I also know that it is very, very burdensome and difficult. And so at the end of the day, now it's happy hour, so I'm going to close it off now. But at the end of the day, that's what we would like to see not happen. Because what did I think? I don't want to have that happen to my kids. It's as simple as that. So what am I in it for? I'm in it for the fact that they will be able to say that I am the fun grandma, and that's about it, and not have to worry about me.
You're the glamma.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, we've had another great day, and it's fun to kick off our shoes and raise a glass. Hope you'll do the same if it's time zone appropriate. Linda reminded us that some people are not yet there.
It's part of your circadian rhythm. You'll knock yourself out.
9:30 p.m. here in Dublin, Ireland.
Tommy,
Nice.
Dublin?
That's
Well,
fabulous. I love Dublin.
yeah,
Beautiful city.
that's a great place.
So I actually just wanted to share because you're all wondering like why is she here? Because I'm certainly more in the my feet are firmly planted in the mainstream. But I had a travel show. In fact, I featured Dublin, Ireland on my show. If you take a look behind me, those are 4 Telly Awards from my travel series. But when COVID hit, my show got canceled, and I decided to make lemonade out of lemons and start which had been a side passion of mine for years, the subject matter of longevity. I thought that the mainstream was just so in the dark about what was happening. I was doing my due diligence to like be up to speed and do as much as I possibly, could to, enhance my and optimize my health span and lifespan. But when I'd start talking to my friends, they're like over their heads completely. So I thought the timing was ripe, and so season 1 of the new 100 longevity campaign launched in the fall of last year, and I only featured the brightest scientific minds in the biology of aging who have these incredible proof of concept cures. And I was getting a little bit, maybe overzealous in the comments because I was wanting to like pull it in, because the frustration level that I felt hearing over and over again from these incredible scientists who are only trying to bring their life's work to fruition, but there's multiple cogs in the wheel, and I just felt their frustration because funding was the biggest thing that everyone kept saying like a broken record. They were waiting for funding to go to clinical trials, and they've been sitting on proof of concept cures. Dr. Rudy Tanzi in particular, who I was hoping Dr. Philippe would be here, but he's not, because he was working, I believe, with the NIA. He had even tried to he has a blood test to be able to like test for Alzheimer's before the onset, so you could actually do something about it. And I was wondering why are they spinning their wheels so, it's just like it's just not happening fast enough for us. So I'm frustrated and I'm not even in it. So
Well,
that's where
Linda,
I'm at. I just want to bring the mainstream up to date because I truly feel that the public are, a catalyst for change. And if they are aware of what's going on, then the private sectors will get on board to, have the funding for X, Y, and Z. They're in the dark, so they don't really know what's even out there, what's possible.
well, Linda, we are thrilled that you have joined us because you can take the message out to your audience. You being a great travel writer and producer.
Well, I'm a TV host, but I'm a lifestyle host. I was featuring
Yeah.
fluff, shopping, travel, spa, fitness. This is the first thing that I've featured.
Yeah. Well,
So-
we'd like to put you to work in being
An
communicator.
ambassador for
Yes.
healthy longevity.
Yeah.
In fact, on the 14th, Thomas put together, and it's one of his great thinking about younger people getting together and trying to see why and how we can get younger people involved in understanding health span and healthy longevity, and that it's different from being sick and getting well. It's not being sick in the first place. So you could be the ambassador. We're talking about reverse mentoring now.
Yeah.
I love social media, but I wasn't born in a time that I really understand how to go viral, but you do.
Yeah.
You, no doubt.
But it's an internal problem that, first of all, I'm actually in contact with people in the UK who have it together and are actually making huge strides in this area. And it's such a sad state of affairs that the US is so far behind the 8 ball on this subject matter because
We agree with you there. You may not have seen our earlier panel today, which was put on by folks from the UK, including Lord Geoffrey Filkin.
I missed it. I wasn't.
Yeah, and well, the point is, we're all over the UK in terms of their being a leader in effect, and as you say, in pursuing healthy longevity
Zarin,
as a national policy.
I got to tell you, it was a really insightful juxtaposition of the UK panel and the US panel, because the US panel certainly was guided and appreciated the guidance from the UK and the experience, but it made, I think it was Linda Fried who pointed out that we're talking about two parallel programs. One where if you want to increase health span by 5 years, geroscience has nothing to do with it. It doesn't need to have anything to do with
We're
it.
there.
Stop
Just
smoking, stop alcohol,
this
sorry
down.
about that. Air pollution, things of that, lose weight. Couple of
Go
things.
out and do some earthing. How about getting grounded? That's something that you all probably are like not promoting or know. Like that's something that I'm a huge fan of. Have you heard of that term?
I have forest bathed many a time.
Thank you. But
I'm with it.
okay.
But the flip side of that, the part where our US geroscientists are really focused is, look, we think that we're going to be able to biologically delay or even reverse aging. And that's a different, longer term activity. And we're going to need to be pursuing education on both fronts. For the Kitalys Institute, I guess we're interested in both missions because we do want to increase health span, but there's some short-term issues, sort of lower hanging fruit. And then there are the more intermediate or higher hanging fruit, which we're also very interested in. Can I just make we have various people whose cameras are not on. Just wanted to take the opportunity to call out folks. And maybe you just introduce yourself from where you are joining us and what you do and why you're with us. We're delighted you are, but maybe you can tell us. I see Fatima and Susan and Carrie and Rob, Rose,
And Peter's here, Susan Fleming.
others. Please speak up. Please introduce yourselves.
I see a few family members.
If
Love
you
my
were-
family support.
If
My
you were
dear
all here,
cousin,
we'd have a
Susan
big party,
Fleming.
right? If you
My
and you-
dearest
I'll
sister,
start.
Rachel.
Tom Vasicek, Chief Scientist of Hela Therapeutics, will be speaking on Thursday afternoon about our obesity therapies. I'm in Dublin, Ireland, because I have an ill 19-year-old who's here in college.
Oh,
And when I return to the States, I'll be heading down to Florida to take care of my ill 103-year-old mom.
Oh wow.
wow.
So to your points, we're all doing it, right? If we can.
That is right.
Others, please speak up and introduce yourselves. This is a social party here.
Okay, I'm Joshua.
Hey, Joshua.
Yeah, I'm a PhD student at the University of Texas at El Paso.
Uh-huh.
And my research is also, I'm interested in investigating biomolecules that are associated with health. So obesity, diabetes, the inflammation pathways that result in those, and how we can get molecules that will slow down the processes. So this panel has actually has been an eye-opener that, I mean, lifespan can be, health span can actually be improved by research. And I'm just fascinated because I'm learning a lot more to actually direct my research. So
Joshua,
That's great, Joshua.
where do you come from, Joshua? Are we your family?
originally I'm from Ghana.
Ghana. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
We need the new blood to
And
keep things
different
going.
continents. We need
Yeah.
everyone globally.
Yeah, that's terrific. Carl, I see you there, Karl. And say a few words about yourself. You're muted.
Unmute Carl, please.
Yes, the button is unclear. I'm on my mobile, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm calling in from Europe, so I'm on my mobile. It's past midnight here in Finland.
Well, thank you. Finland.
Thank you for staying up and joining us.
Are you in Helsinki?
That's cool.
Yeah, I'm in the countryside in near Helsinki. I'm living in Switzerland and Finland. I'm a Finn originally. I recently set up a new company in life sciences in Switzerland. And we work with the metabolic issues. And the first goal is to find a new way to help cancer patients. It's actually a platform because, as you guys know, the metabolic issues are behind all of the serious diseases, if it's not a viral one. And we have recently made a discovery that might change a lot of things. So I took the best know-how of the old scientists and set up a new company to take this idea further and to the market. Company is called Cancer Research and Biotechnology AG, Zug, Switzerland.
So, I mean, we want to build a community here. So you may have seen Guido Cromer on one of the panels, I think it was yesterday, but we're on our campus at Kitalys Institute. There are ways to just reach out, and even from the conference, you can push buttons. I hope that you make good connections and have flourishing conversations.
And this,
Very good.
and we're going to have an emerging company showcase this weekend, this fourth day on October 14th. And next year, maybe you won't even be an emerging company, but if you are, you're invited to let us know exactly what you're doing, because we do want to highlight, without costing startup companies incredible amounts of money to promote themselves. We want to highlight the best in Metabesity potential emerging companies. So we're going to have a whole day of that.
So stay in touch, please.
So stay in touch.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for staying up late.
Yeah, I'll be on and off, and I'll take the screen off when I brush my teeth. But
Very good.
Someone else here who hasn't spoken yet, please. I see Fatima.
Cynthia Stern, thank you so much for participating in the panel just this afternoon. Great to have you.
Are you on
exciting
mute?
panel and lots of good ideas and good exchanges, and I'm so pleased with this whole afternoon behavioral panel. It was just really fabulous.
Cynthia, please move closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry about that.
Much better, thank you.
Okay, I was just saying the panels this afternoon, the behavior panels, were just so fascinating and really bring together the science with the behavior and environments. It's really nice to see it coming together.
And I will say hello to Joshua, who we just talked to. Cynthia with the United Nations, she's many times brought people from Ghana onto our conferences and our committees. And there's just so much that we learn from Africa, actually, in many, many ways, on many levels. It's been a fascinating relationship. So you never know who knows who and who can make a nice networking group on our campus, an international group.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
David, Verna, Fatima, speak up anytime. Also, to keep the conversation going, we have some of our regulars, people who've been with us for a couple days now, I guess. We're fascinated to hear what you thought was remarkable or interesting or just plain wrong from a Vivian or Claude or Peter or anyone else.
And Gordon, too.
Gordon?
Well, I have a question. I've been thinking about some of the beginning days, and a question for Zan, really. I'm curious how you felt about Teresa Kehoe's presentation and her point that when it comes to age-related frailty or age-related sarcopenia and why there hasn't been more progress there, that she said, well, nobody agrees on the definition for sarcopenia. Nobody agrees on the definition for frailty. Dr. Freed has a wonderful scientific area of research in this, but her definition is different from Goralnik and so forth. Do you feel that that's a legitimate criticism from FDA? And what is it that the geriatric or gerontology community
You got
could
5
do?
hours? How goes that?
Well, Gordon and I, of course, have been in the trenches here. We went to FDA with a sarcopenia drug. And this is the very issue that we faced. However, first of all, I entirely agree. It's a non-issue about a so-called lack of consensus about definition of sarcopenia. There may be some differences around the edges, but that's not an issue. What really concerned me, and I know this was, again, part of our struggle, is that FDA was not going to be satisfied with just showing a functional benefit. In other words, if you could get people to walk faster, and as you used to say, to be able to get across the street before the light changes, that's good enough. But no, FDA wanted to have patient-reported outcomes. In other words, they wanted patients to be able to, or people, subjects, to be able to say that they could feel better, or that they were doing things they noticed better.
They felt they were stronger.
We don't ask that of cholesterol-lowering drugs.
No.
It was just a total inanity from my standpoint. I did not want to bring it up with Teresa.
It was before her time? Or?
It was before her time. It was not in her shop, but she sort of inherited this tradition that we need to have a comprehensive assessment of sarcopenia, and that includes patient-reported outcomes. And folks, people who are frail typically have cognitive impairment. They're not going to be able to tell you they're feeling better. They may actually be doing much better, but not even notice it. So this is, I'm glad you allowed me to vent about this, because it just does get in my craw. I do think this is where we need to educate FDA. And this is a very key point for healthy longevity product development, not just for making frail people less frail. If we can get FDA to agree to, for example, gait speed as an endpoint, a primary efficacy endpoint, this can be used in younger patients before they're even frail as a means of actually determining that they are in a slower decline in terms of their gait speed. And that could be enough to approve a therapy if it has an acceptable benefit risk. Mm-hmm. So Gordon, I'm preaching to the choir. You're my teacher as much as my colleague here, but you tried mightily to construct a kind of patient-reported composite, but we had to do it out of thin air, and it wasn't going to be particularly sensitive anyway. So anyway, thank you for that.
Well,
But Sam, this is called strange. I mean, Sam, that's an entirely doable exercise to come up with that instrument. I mean, compared to a lot of the things that's discussed this afternoon about redistribution and paying for everybody's exercise and all these things, designing an instrument that can measure quality of life improvements in people who improve sarcopenia, that's an entirely doable exercise. So maybe I'll challenge you on that one day.
It's a 10-year project, Paul, and I hate to disagree, because there has actually been such a project that FDA put on its website back in 2015 by our friend that Gordon knows very well, Dr. Goralnik at University of Maryland. That has gone nowhere, and it may be another 10 years before it does. And so in theory, it is doable, but to validate it is very difficult. And the extreme, it takes intervention trials to show a difference between two different groups to make a correlation to say that you have a valid predictor. So I'm going to just...
That's correct. I agree with that, but I still think it's an entirely doable exercise.
It should be. I couldn't agree more. We want to make it more feasible than it is now.
Yeah.
But right now, FDA is not making it.
It's doable, but we, for example, I was able to help support Stephanie Studensky to develop a clinical global impression instrument for frailty in the elderly, and it's been published. But ultimately, for whatever reason, it hasn't really been picked up, and probably the technical people who are really good at this will say, well, it hasn't really been validated in the way they want. That is to show that if you do it and you follow people over several years, that it predicts the ultimate outcome. The other, Jan, I wanted just very briefly to also bring up a recent paper in JAMA that's on this issue. A company has developed an activin 2B receptor antagonist, which should be a great target for muscle. And I thought, well, wow, this will be, when you've got this sort of thing like myostatin or activin 2B, this is where the companies will really jump into frailty. But instead, what did they do? They treated diabetes. And what did it do? It raised muscle mass. And the muscle mass caused them, it used energy, that caused them to lose fat mass. And the hemoglobin A1C went down by 0.8, and they're going to develop it for diabetes. Why would they do this? Because there isn't a path for frailty.
Well, that's right. It's a great point. There is a well-trod path with hemoglobin A1C to approve a drug for type 2 diabetes. So they take what is a
path of lesser resistance.
Yeah, and so maybe they'll go on to developing it for a sarcopenia indication, but this is typically how it goes. A lot of companies.
I have to say, oh my God, I'm so frustrated. How can we change the way it's going? Like this antiquated system?
That is just what Kitalys Institute is trying to do. We're trying to get to the roadblocks. Not just to feature the science. The science is so exciting. Or to gripe about it, but we're not just griping about it. We really want to be FDA's trusted partner in helping to develop validated pathways, biomarkers, surrogate endpoints, and other measures that are needed to facilitate the approval of products that people need now, not in a decade.
Right. Well, I heard U.S. policy, like go to your Congress. I mean, is that the route that we have to take to change the FDA's policies?
Were you in our national policy module in the middle of the day? If not,
yes.
Okay, great. So in fact, I see Richard Shaw from London. Thank you. The Europeans were calling in late at night. He was on the panel for the global lessons, and we had folks on the U.S. national policy debate. And it was a fascinating discussion for me. It was revelatory in a sense, because as our U.S. panel said, if you want to increase average health span by 5 years, you actually don't need geroscience. Geroscience can help for sure, but if you just dealt with tobacco, if you dealt with alcohol, if you dealt with air pollution, if you dealt with excess or lack of exercise, etc., you can get there. All of those are good things for the public health and for our society and for our treasury and so forth. But at the same time, there's a medium term to longer term opportunity here to really move the needle on the basis of delaying or reversing aging. And I think the Kitalys Institute is going to have to deal with both tracks because they're both things that we're interested in. But it clarifies for us what sort of national policy we're shooting for when we go to Congress, and we do. We have been engaging with members of Congress and plan to do it more. We have to be crystal clear about the audience and the motivations of the people we're talking to try to maximize results. Sorry, I'll shut up.
On the other hand, we've got to keep our expectations reasonable.
Yeah,
I have to say, despite all the great science we've heard about, making that translation from the lab to large clinical trials is to the market even more difficult.
Right.
But the point is, we do not have candidates that are bright, shining opportunities. Metformin, which is a diabetes drug I approved when I was at FDA, and it was against a lot of opposition at that time, is one of the candidates that's being pushed forward. But at best, it could improve lifespan by only maybe a few years. It's not going to be a big effect. We'll hope that the so-called TAME trial will be successful, where metformin is going to be tested for that purpose. But don't expect a miracle. It's not.
Well, I'm not expecting a miracle, but the one thing that I learned so much producing this show, I can't even tell you, but common threads were inflammation across the board. Was every chronic disease, if you get rid of the inflammation, you get rid of the disease, and it also reverses aging. Boom. You can't bring that to the FDA because it has to be some of these proof of concepts could cure multiple diseases, but you have to put a label on it and say, okay, it's only for X, so you can hopefully get it to market. But it's just so antiquated. It just seems so counterproductive, and we have to think of the greater good.
Well, but we still need to have the data that it works. That's a fundamental challenge.
And if they can get the funding.
Exactly, Linda. A huge chicken and egg problem. And I want to beg to differ. There are bright, shiny candidates out there. Michael Zemmel, I see, has unmuted, and he wants to speak up.
Please, I don't want to be the only one.
We have one of the most wonderful, safest treatments for preventing obesity and for helping many people suffering from obesity to lose their weight that we just can't get funded. It is so challenging. And I hope you all will join us on Thursday afternoon at 3:30 Eastern time when we give our talk to hear more about it. I don't want to go into detail about it here, but
Tom, we share your pain. We very much want to help in any way to get you across the line.
Absolutely.
And what you're looking to do is simply get a weight loss indication. And that ought to be funded. That ought to be leading then to helping to prevent diabetes and presumably other chronic diseases. So that is a potential solution. But for you to, with your drug, to show that you prevent a multitude of chronic diseases would take a 12-year trial. And you're not going to get money for that. Yeah. So you need to take one step at a time, get the drug approved, funded first. So that's what you need. We want to help you with that. You get it funded. We're going to get Linda to get you the funds.
Listen, if I could, I would. I just honestly, okay, I know what you're doing is phenomenal, but think of this. We have an aging population. By 2050, we're going to be outnumbering children under 5. We're going to be 60 and over by that date, or even earlier. Alzheimer's is the leading, one of the top 6, I think it's ranked 6 as the leading disease for the elderly.
We call it type 3 diabetes.
Yep, type 3.
Okay.
It's number one fear in America.
Okay, so this is huge. This is actually huge. Dr. Rudy Tanzi has the cure for Alzheimer's. He's had it for two decades. He needs the funds to be able to take the clinical trial to prove his concept. He describes it all in the episode. And he also has, he made it very clear to me that, we have a simple blood test to be able to test for diabetes or heart disease, but we don't have anything in place for Alzheimer's until it's too late.
Linda, a lot of that.
Something for obesity, and Michael Zemmel has GRAS, that is to say, nutritional supplementation that can help with obesity and other conditions. Absolutely right. We need to get funding, but we should step back and ask ourselves, what's the matter? Why are the private capital markets not stepping forward? It's not because they're trying to be mean. We have to figure out what motivates them that they think they're going to make more money from doing that than investing in Coca-Cola or real estate. If it doesn't hang together, we're just sitting in an armchair saying people ought to do this and people ought to do that. So we have to.
The elephant in the room is they're not wanting to cure disease. They just want to put the pharmaceutical, whatever it is, to not prevent anything, but to just put a Band-Aid on it.
Well,
I think that's really what I'm seeing.
That's a little unfair. Linda, I'm sorry. I think that's a little unfair. I think the poster child for it being unfair is an entirely way off the topic of geroscience. Let's look at hepatitis C. Okay, hepatitis C, we have a cure for it. Not a Band-Aid, but a cure for. You have a self-limiting drug. When people with hepatitis C are treated, they're done. And when the fairly large population, now diminishing, is treated, even at what many would consider to be a ridiculously high price, hepatitis C will, for all intents and purposes, be gone. We can do the same with other chronic disease. But Linda, when you say you have somebody who has cured Alzheimer's.
No. He has proof of concept. That's not what I said. He has to get the funding, and we can't rely on the private sector to do that. Why are these agencies in place?
Well, there are agencies to support that research and private investors. And unfortunately, there's not enough money to go around. It's the problem. And it comes back to national policy. We need Congress.
That's the place to start, is national, to like spearhead it, starting in which department. Give me direction and I will go. Seriously.
Claude Noir, you were leaning forward. Did you have something you wanted to say? Claude?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One, actually, the thing I thought was fascinating today for part of the thing was, I think it was the guy that talked about loneliness, and having actually the government involved in helping people deal with loneliness. Yes. And I mean, if you look at the 10 top things, how people live longer, okay, number one is like using your brain, keeping your brain happy, and having friends around you.
That's right.
You do much better than your diabetes, your blood pressure, your smoking. I'm not saying all those things you shouldn't address, but those are the things that really maybe we should redirect our focus on loneliness, because especially during this COVID epidemic.
Claude, we've actually covered loneliness in previous meetings.
Yeah.
Lucy Rose is a big proponent of addressing loneliness.
It's a bigger cause of disease than obesity.
It actually is.
Yeah. No, I was at your program. I was reinforcing that slide that I remember seeing during that presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a vicious cycle, as you know.
Yeah, the other question, like you were talking about the FDA and biomarkers, okay? Well, 30 years ago at the VA, we started looking at urine albumin as a marker of disease. And we were amazed to see what a driver it was for cardiovascular disease, stroke, and all-cause mortality. And even at numbers well below what the guidelines say. Those numbers of 30 and 300 were all created by the nephrologist looking for progression to end-stage renal disease. It had nothing to do with cardiovascular stroke. In fact, if I would have said, I think albumin in the urine is a leading cause of stroke 30 years ago, they would have thought I was, in California growing some unapproved product to smoke. And but I've tried to go to the FDA and ask them, can't you use urine albumin as a biomarker for cardiovascular disease? And they said, no, we refuse to do that. And I said, well, why? Well, we just don't want to do it.
And I said, well, look at the data. You reduce albuminuria by 30%. You reduce end-stage renal disease by 30%. You reduce cardiovascular mortality by 30%. So why wouldn't we want to use that as a biomarker?
It's a great example because, as you say, it's a very good marker. But what FDA will come back and say is that, well, we already allow glomerular filtration rate, which you can measure as an endpoint in a relatively short period of time, as a necessary and sufficient endpoint for approving various indications, including the only approved indication for a complication of diabetes, that is diabetic neuropathy. So FDA will accept something short of major clinical endpoints, but it's a good example of where a biomarker that could have been just as good and maybe accepted by FDA has been superseded by what is a more, I guess, robust endpoint, which is equally accepted.
Yeah, well, my challenge is the markers they use are doubling of serum creatinine, death, and needing renal assistance.
Right.
I mean,
but you don't need all
markers
three.
are
You just need to show that creatinine clearances or creatinine levels double.
But Claude, I was going to thank you for broadening the discussion beyond FDA and drugs to loneliness and other things, which may be just as much, if not bigger drivers than drugs. But here we are talking about FDA again. A lot of today's discussions had to do with other things that move the needle. And I think they're all of concern to us. Obviously, those of us coming from drug development, it's near and dear to our hearts to think about how to get therapeutics approved, a regulatory pathway. But I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. What do you think? It's going to move the needle for 3%, 10% of the population? I guess statins have moved a serious portion of the needle. But compared to loneliness or social determinants of health as described in the afternoon sessions and so forth, all of this, we have the knowledge. And the question is, how do we translate knowledge into politics and action so that we can actually move the needle on public health?
Yeah, and I think you bring up another important point. It's also, it's like I always say, when something new comes out that looks very good, like let's say the SGLT2s for clearly the benefit for end-stage disease and cardiovascular death. Well, I'll suspect in 10 or 15 years, maybe 30-40% of the people that would benefit from the drug are taking the drug. I mean, UACR, there's just a paper that was presented, the fifth heart in diabetes. Only 55% of patients with diabetes are getting a UACR as part of their workup.
So Claude, to be provocative, let me ask you, among those people who are going to be taking it, 30, 40, 50%, how many of them are privileged, insured, et cetera? And what portion of the population is being left behind because they can't afford it, they're not insured, et cetera? Those are all part of the subject matter of this conference.
I totally agree. I always argue with we only spend, people think that when I ask patients, how much does it cost? I mean, when you think of healthcare, what percentage is pharmaceutical? And they say, oh, like 90%. And I said, well, why do you say that? Because that's what I get hit with.
What they see, that's what they pay, yeah.
Right, and it's only 9%. 60% is hospitalization.
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, this is where a stitch in time saves 9. If you can prevent a disease, that's so much better than having to manage it. If you can get in early, it will take fewer medications, less cost. If you wait to the end, you can spend your entire national budget on keeping somebody alive. And we all know that's crazy. I see Vivian Lowe. I think you're probably exercising right now. If I had to guess.
Twitchy.
All my Zoom meetings, standing or just marching in place, because that's the only way I can get my steps in.
I think this is what it's all about. You should have been on the behavior panel.
Well, as I said, if I can't get the steps in, I can't ask my patients to do it, right? So we find a way. And, all my patients are moving around during their Zoom meetings.
Excellent.
So Peter, I'm going to really put your feet to the fire on this one. And Linda, listen to this one.
Okay, I'm writing down people's names as I go so I can look up who you are and what you do later.
What Zan would call retail. Let me show
Let's
you,
be
Linda.
careful
No,
now.
don't worry, where the money is. Sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is a terrible frailty disease of aging. It is probably the one disease that I will get.
Why do you say that?
Because it comes almost all the time with aging, particularly in people who are in good shape,
It's
actually.
slowed if you do resistance training, but
Right.
it's not
It slows.
avoidable 100%.
But this is what I want to tell you, Peter. It makes you look terrible in a bathing suit. Forget about all of the other morbidities with it. Why isn't your friend Larry Ellison and all the other wellness gurus who are putting millions into these special islands for longevity, who are offering wealthy adults to look wonderful all their life, looking at the science between sarcopenia? It is the one thing where there's a confluence, a serious confluence between ill health and appearance as you age. This is the science that they should be putting their money behind. And Linda, this is the media buzz that could be created as an inroad to understanding how we could really age well without, shots and surgery and all of these things, to have a really healthy looking body all of our lives. That's where the confluence of this mega trend of wellness could come together with neuroscience.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I personally want to tackle Alzheimer's because my dad had dementia. So I think that we have to have a priority list. What is the, biggest thing that everyone suffers from? If that's the case, then yes, we should put that at the top of the list. But
I just want to jump in, Adrian.
in human capital, but it is something that could persuade this very billion-dollar wellness industry.
Adrian,
I haven't even heard of that until today, by the way, or yesterday when somebody mentioned sarcopenia.
Yes, but I just want to say, when you lose weight, right? So you were talking to Peter, and Peter was talking about how the original spas were essentially, I hate to use the term, but fat farms. When you lose weight, up to 20% of your weight loss is going to be from muscle. So you have to accept some measure of sarcopenia with every weight loss bout. However, if you know what you're doing, then you minimize that. I like to think I know what I'm doing. So we're doing it with our patients. And when I get excited is they don't lose a lot of weight, but they've lost the fat, and we've actually either increased or kept the muscle mass. And that is phenomenally hard to do, but the science is there and we do it. It means that we can apply it practically in a clinical population. So we can do it, but we're not actually utilizing that science because it is there. And again, back to silos, Zan, because a lot of this information you can get from the exercise and sports world, and they are utilizing it, but we are not bringing that into the medical world, right? And I have been doing that with our patients, and we have these phenomenal cases where we do cut the fat mass down and they don't lose much weight, maybe 5 pounds over 3 months, if that. I had a guy who just recently did not lose any weight, but it was all visceral fat that came off, and we preserved all muscle mass. So it's phenomenally hard to do because it requires a lot of attention to everything and to the nutrition particularly, but the science is there, Adrian. So you can check us out in Boston, all right?
Well, but what you make a very important point about is that we are in silos. That, for example, Ken Ford, who's a world expert on ketosis and ketogenesis as an approach to health, is not known to people in my world of diabetes and metabolism and diseases. And then likewise, the geroscientists, they don't talk to the people in the diabetes and cardiovascular field. They're all just hunkered down in their little silos. And that's one thing we're trying to do something about, bring them all together, find common cause, and to collaborate at every turn, particularly at the high level where we together seek funding of companies like Tom Vasicek and others that really need to be supported.
Just for color, by the way, Tom's company is called Gila, or Gila. I believe, is your compound from the Gila venom and the lizard
Some the GLP-1s were first commercialized from a component of the Gila monster saliva found by
Interesting
John
backstory, just for people to know.
Yeah, that's why we're named Gila Therapeutics, is we have a
Wait,
fancy for that.
Adrian, you called out Peter Anderson. I don't think I've heard a response about.
You didn't give him a chance to answer.
But I want to clarify that Zen was right on target. You do understand where I was going. I see that there is a tremendous benefit to the wellness private industry with what we are doing.
Cross silo talk.
Absolutely. No
I mean,
doubt about it.
Well, Peter, can you make
Adrian,
that
what you're really talking about, I mean, we have facelifts, now there's hand and neck rejuvenation. Maybe it becomes a protocol like a whole body, sarcopenia lift. I mean,
I have to see what this looks like. I've never seen it. So I've got to look at what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'll show it to you.
Okay.
So I'm 73 years old. I weigh 114 pounds. I'm in very, very good shape. I exercise all the time. Well, I used to be a very heavy person. But you see this?
Oh, that's what you're talking about?
That's one of the many, many things. There's some very sad things that are really serious in sarcopenia, but it all has to do with the kind of frailty and loss of muscle mass, no matter how much you exercise. Now, Vivian, she's got a formula, but it's probably hard to keep up, I would have to say.
What's the formula, Vivian?
We'll visit her in Boston, Linda. Do a show on Vivian.
I do this.
There's another issue on the sarcopenia, and that is that when you actually ask people, why did you get sarcopenia? 40% of them say, well, doc, I think it began with my arthritis and I just couldn't move around as much. And, I became sedentary and I just got weaker and weaker and weaker. So if you're lucky enough, but even somebody like I'm forgetting his name now, the Scripps Clinic guy who said he was
Copel.
Ed Copel. He said, I ran my whole life until I got osteoarthritis and had a knee replacement. But now I bike. But
that's the big problem, because a lot of people just say, I'm over, I'm done, I'm not going to do anything. And that's yet another issue. But we do need products to help people recover. And this is another area Gordon has been very involved in.
I would also just say that it's interesting that in the long list of things, I don't think I've heard arthritis mentioned. And arthritis is one of the age-related diseases that really does have, whether it's osteoarthritis and particularly the inflammatory arthritis, are a huge problem throughout the world, and one that really should be a strong motivation for anti-aging research.
Well, it's a huge problem. And, Larry Steinman and his close colleague, Sir Mark Feldman, were involved in developing the therapies, the anti-tumor necrosis factor therapies, which are now the largest market in the pharmaceutical area for rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah, but it's still osteo is still.
We have nothing for osteoporosis. I mean osteoarthritis.
Yeah.
If you listen to the European Sports Congress, they addressed osteoarthritis very recently, and interestingly, their data seems to show that there's no relation with, you always hear that I ran until I ground my knees to the ground. And apparently that's not true. And they actually they had their subjects exercise and continue to exercise, and beyond the 12, and I think the dose was 12 weeks of, some form of resistance training. And they were told that, they told the patients, the pain is okay, don't worry about it. But as we went through towards the end of the period, the pain started to decline significantly, and they actually rebuilt the cartilage in their joints. And so now again, this is from the sports medicine world, but we're not aware of it in the medical world, right?
Well, I think
my patients say every day, oh, I can't exercise because I have osteoarthritis. So
right.
Well, you make a really good point. You make a really good point, and I think we often forget that cartilage, our articular cartilage, is the largest avascular organ in the whole body, and it gets its nutrients and gets rid of its waste by being compressed and relaxing, compressed and relaxing. It's a sort of a convection diffusion process. And one of my orthopedic friends, his favorite thing is motion is lotion. And you are absolutely right. A lifetime of activity is probably the best preventive we've got, but unfortunately it's too late for that for many people.
And you know, Gordon, what we're learning is that the bone tissue itself is an endocrine organ, and it is secreting, in effect, trophic factors, which have a lot to do with intermediary metabolism. It's quite incredible.
Yeah.
Totally unexpected. So there's a lot for us to learn in this area.
Now,
Claude again. I have a couple of questions. One is I got Bruce Frankel sent this link for the loneliness. And when you click it on, though, it says you're not permitted to access it.
Bruce,
we'll fix that for you.
Okay. And then the other thing, I'm
we do
fascinated
have
by
2
Linda's
great lectures on that subject.
I'm fascinated by Linda's enthusiasm about the Alzheimer's thing. And, you know, I would like to get more information from you about that. And I'd be particularly interested because of the ApoE link with Alzheimer's disease that, you know, and not only, as I shared yesterday, the APO link with nutritional recommendations. Very different between.
Well, you know, Claude, on the APO link, it's true. It's a predictor, but it's a weak one. I mean, it's not great. And here's the worst thing.
What do you do for Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah.
For Alzheimer's disease? ApoE is a...
It's relatively weak. I mean, yes, it's, well, we can argue about what is strong and what is weak, but here's the key point. What do you do about it? What if you have a bad genotype? What are you going to do about it?
Okay, so in my interview with Dr. Rudy Tanzi, I can share with you what he said, because I'm not an expert on Alzheimer's. I'm just sharing with you what the scientists have shared with my audience. And by the way, the name of my show is called The New 100 Longevity Campaign. And you can find it on Flipboard TV, and also thehealthjournals.com just picked it up. So it's on there as well.
Put it in the chat, Linda. So
Okay. But as far as, okay, so there are drugs that if you can detect it in time before the onset occurs, there are drugs to slow the process down until this advanced therapy comes to market. But the problem is,
we hope.
I mean, how many of those are approved and how many of those are in research waiting for funding?
We don't have the evidence, quite frankly.
We have people who want to research it, and we'd love to have them research it, but they need to finish getting their evidence so that we can make it available to people who want to access it, to buy it.
Yeah.
Well, what about well, actually, this episode has a lot of variables in there, but putting in place a blood test to be able to see if you are predisposed to getting Alzheimer's, then that would be a huge benefit for future generations so they can start addressing the issue. Once you have it, you can't do much once you have the onset. So it's to prevent it, like,
Linda, you probably heard about this controversy, the approval of a drug called Adahem, which probably doesn't work, if you want my opinion. But FDA approved it. And so
no press here, taking things for the record.
It was approved on faith, and it happens to be very expensive, and it happens to have some adversity. And
how was it approved then? How was it approved?
That's
you got 8 hours?
Remember they said there's maybe
that's what every one of the FDA advisory committee members said, and their article to the New England Journal protesting the approval of that drug. So the point is, yeah, it's approved, but the evidence is thin at best, and it's expensive, and it even has some safety issues. So why would you give it to your mother? I wouldn't recommend it, and I don't think most people in the field would as well. The problem is we just don't have the effective treatments. That's
And that's because he hasn't been able to get the funding to be able to do the clinical trials.
That's circular reasoning a little bit.
Maybe.
We absolutely agree he ought to get funded. And a lot of other people on this panel and the rest of the world, once you get funded, then there's going to be a sieve, and some of them will actually turn out to work. But you can't assume that someone has interesting, intriguing data in mice or whatever it is, and therefore it's going to work.
Yeah, the way it works in the drug or the pharmaceutical industry is that you're going to fail 90% of the
We've
time.
cured mice for 30, 40 years.
Well, Gordon Cutler can tell you that he's had some major successes, but how many failures? I mean, you just have to have many shots on goal. We need to fund all the shots we can so that we ultimately will get effective.
Okay, I'm going to throw out one more episode that I just thought of, because I have a scientist who's curing cancer, and not here because he can't do it here, but there are some clinical trials happening where he's doing immunotherapy with cryoablation. It's Dr. Jason Williams with the Williams Cancer Institute, but he's in Mexico City curing stage 4 cancer patients by targeting the cancer and doing a cocktail of, and it's a whole protocol. I mean, like, it's everything from getting your gut health in order before doing this. But what I'm saying is these types of cures, I'm hearing like a lot of people going out of the country to be able to do these advanced therapies.
Don't do it. I tell you, if you have to go out of the country, it's probably not safe and may not be, and probably not effective. It may be.
No, he's been doing it for over 5 years. That's when
it doesn't matter if he's got the data.
He does
to show that it works and is safe. Then
you should run, not walk, because it'll be worth billions.
Let's read it in a medical journal.
Linda.
And we're all for it. But
okay, so that's the other problem, is they're too busy to take the time.
No. Linda, I don't know if anyone else on this panel remembers going back 40 years, probably, Laetrile, which was also delivered for cancer in Mexico. It was an apricot pit extract, and there were thousands of true believers.
Exactly.
The best thing that it provided was cyanide, and went downhill from there.
Yeah.
But there were thousands of true believers.
He's published. He's published on PubMed. He's published in several different peer-reviewed.
Look, this is the big problem, Linda, that there are a lot of shysters out there. And then there are a lot of very well-intentioned clinicians and investigators who think they've got something. And they say, well, I'm too busy to publish, or I don't think it's fair that.
I didn't say he was too busy. I think that he's just so busy curing these patients who have no other, literally, he's curing stage 4 cancer patients. 5 years in remission.
If he's got good data, there's always a good journal that'll publish it.
Yeah. Well, we got to have solid evidence that it works and it's safe. Right. And if he's truly doing that, God bless him. Put him on a plane to Stockholm, because, really, we need cures, but we got to have the data. And if he's not able to publish,
because if it works, it'll show up in the trials. If it's not showing up in the trials, you got to ask yourself, are those just anecdotal? I'm
going to share with you why it's not working in the trials, is because he's doing cryoablation with immunotherapy targeting the cancer, and they're doing only one portion of the treatment, not doing the full treatment the way it's meant to be effective. So, I mean, listen, you should watch the show and judge for yourself, but he's also very much, cancer's big business. Of course. And that's something that, he was saying that he's trying to cure it. And
Linda, I live in your world. I'm a podcaster for many, many years.
Okay.
Peter and I have gone to the Pritikin Institute. We have gone to cancer research institutes all over Mexico. And I will tell you something. I have learned from these two gentlemen. You cannot take anything simply on faith. I did, because it makes a good show.
It's not faith. I mean, this is like,
And because it sounds good, and because I want to believe it, and because I look into it. I'm a pretty smart person. But when I really began to understand why you need these kinds of proof, I changed my Generation Bold approach. That it didn't diminish the show. It didn't diminish the good I was doing in the world. And it didn't take away from those sorts of people. But I began to ask them different questions, and they shined in their own way, because all of these people have something to contribute, but they don't have to contribute a panacea. And I'm very happy to
And
talk
this is
to you
not a
about this
disrespect of
offline.
Dr.
Not
Ruby
a-
Tanzik. I mean, he
No,
may well
he
have
may
something
really have
really
something
interesting,
there,
but we need
sure.
We're
to
all for it.
communicate that forward to the regulatory
bring it the
authorities
right
and the
way.
general patient population.
And it's very hard for people like us who are communicators and enthusiasts to want to step aside for a few minutes and step back.
okay, well, I'm going to say one thing. Before I had Dr. Bill Andrews help me curate my list of scientists, because he said that there are some shysters out there. There are ones that are not, highly respected. And I can't tell you how many times when I would, contact a potential guest, they're like, well, who else is going to be on the show? Because they want to make sure that they're within good company. So I was really careful with curating this list, and they're the elite scientists who are actually trying to make a difference. But I didn't feature only scientists. What happened is I was getting frustrated and more frustrated with hearing how they were spinning their wheels and not making the progress that they were hoping to make with, trying to make this difference, and they're like stuck, like they can't like jump through that hoop to like get what needs to be done happening, which is funding, and to be able to show the proof of that it's not just a proof of concept. So I actually, season 2, I decided I'm going to feature actual healing modalities, things that you can take advantage of now to optimize your health span and lifespan, that the public can actually do to better themselves. Like one of them is called Brain Tap, which is incredible. I don't know if you've heard of Brain Tap, but it's you're talking about brain health as well as mental health. It's an incredible tool. Those are the kinds of things that I am now trying to, because I'm wanting to like have some hope, because these scientists, you're even skeptical and you haven't even heard what he had to say, but it's like everyone is hypercritical and they don't know the information. I would love for you to see that episode to hear what he's doing.
Just to be clear, we're not skeptical. We're waiting to see the randomized controlled trials and other things which allow us to release this to the general public, not just an individual doctor working miraculous, consistent, helping hundreds and thousands of patients. Because we've seen that in the hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, various other things, and I'm not talking them down. I'm saying if they work, they should show up in the formal trials. Until
Right.
they do, we can't release it to the general population to do the most good that they can do. So we'd love to see that come forward. We don't want to.
So he's accruing his list because he is curing stage 4 cancer patients over 5 years. So he is using that truly as his own clinical trial. He's showing like how he's capable of doing so, and he's basically killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
All right,
Well,
this is
Linda-
Claude. Let me chime in. Yeah, I would say, Linda, when I hear things like this, I'm optimistic. I always have a hope, but when I hear things like this and they're too good to be true, I tend to be a little bit more saying I want a little more data. Now, the thing I think interesting though is I'm really struck by the fact that they don't think there's some question about ApoE links and Alzheimer's disease. That sort of surprises me, because if we know that 25% of the population has a copy of E4. And if you actually look at the science of those E4 patients, they do not take DHA in the brain. They do not take it up as well as people with APO2. And so one of the hypotheses is that 98% of the brain is DHA. And it could very well be that the transport of DHA is very critical in the process of reducing Alzheimer's disease. Now, that hasn't been studied, so it's just a speculation. But what I do find interesting, and again, this is not causality, and I'll make it very clear, it's not causality. But if I have a patient with an ApoE4, I recommend that they increase their diet of omega-3 fatty acids. And again, there's some
epidemiologic evidence.
Right. That's right.
It's not randomized controlled data.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree. But observational studies say, I mean, not observation, but observational studies say that the people who consume more omega-3s, and I think that have ApoE4, they tend to have less of a problem or less of a chance of getting Alzheimer's disease. Now,
their phospholipid.
It's a reasonable thing to do.
Right.
I think
it really doesn't cost
it's a good clinical judgment to suggest that to people.
Right.
But we don't know what the effect size is going to be, do we, Michael?
Say that again.
It's a good thing to take.
No, we don't know the effect size because the dose, we don't even know the right dose. We can speculate on the right dose in a couple of gram range, and that seems to be reasonable. The other question I would ask, Claude, is, and I know this is skating around the edge of evidence base, but do you consider providing an alternative CNS energy source, i.e. ketones?
Ketones?
Yeah, I mean, that came up.
That's a good point. It does have effect on neurotrophic growth factors in that.
I'm sorry?
It does have effect on neurotrophic growth factors.
Mm-hmm.
So well, that's what exercise does. That's why exercise gives you, you get a little ketone, get a little ketotic, and bingo, your brain factors improve considerably.
Well, we know that ketosis may have an important role in the CNS. Go ahead.
Even just as an energy source.
Yeah.
Right.
So as an ApoE4 carrier, I do take 2 grams of fish oil a day, and I do take beta hydroxybutyrate. But whenever I do something like this, and this is somewhat to Linda's point, I consider them my placebos. In the sense that they make me feel better, but I don't know whether I'm helping, and I acknowledge the possibility that there may be for me and my genotype and so forth, which is different from every other human on earth, it may actually be harmful. And the only way to really know whether something like this is helpful is to take a bunch of people like me, ApoE4 carriers, randomly assign them, to one group and the other, and then really look carefully and rigorously at the difference. And you got to be sure there aren't dropouts. You got to be sure that all the guys who got Alzheimer got dropped out of the one arm and so forth. It really has to be monitored and carefully done. And this is the point that Zan is making. Those of us who've actually had the idea of tried to follow patients over years in a trial, you never have, almost never. I think in one trial I did, that was a 4-year trial, I had 100% of the people remain in it. But you lose them for one reason or another. They move, they whatever. And all of these things affect the statistics and the likelihood that you could make an error. And there's a type 1 error and a type 2 error. And we've been rigorously trained to try to avoid ever coming to the wrong conclusion, because the last thing we want us to do, or the FDA, is to advise millions of people. And it used to be that millions of women took things like diethylstilbestrol, and their children got reproductive tract cancers. And there are lots of things that people did that we thought were great and turned out to, and that's the whole reason the FDA exists, so that from now on, we won't hurt people by missing the truth. It's hard. It's not easy. And occasionally, even the FDA admits, even now, that they're going to approve some things that don't work or are harmful. And I think on this Alzheimer's, I think part of the reason this got approved, this aducanumab, and I don't think it works either, is that so much has been invested. And it did seem to be affecting, well, it was definitely affecting one of the key markers that you see in blood that people talk about, the beta amyloid.
Yep.
And they didn't approve it as a final approval. It's an accelerated approval where they're required to get additional evidence. And so it is a special category that's been used in some cancer drugs to get, because it's a balance between people who are sick now and desperately want something. And, but I wouldn't have approved it either, but I also understand why it was. And I think if it really truly doesn't work, both either doctors won't use it and or it'll be withdrawn at some future time.
Yeah,
Well, Gordon, to be fair, how many accelerated, I'm sorry.
Well,
I was just going to say, how many accelerated approvals have been withdrawn?
Well, a fair
I don't know.
number have been recently in
Well,
the
just recently,
technology area.
Yeah.
For at
more
least certain,
recently than in the past. There
Yeah.
needs to be a.
yeah. But to your point, Gordon, it really
Yeah.
comes down to getting evidence that the product really works. And right now, we're in a gray area. It may work a little bit, but we don't know. And so it's going to take 10 years before we probably have a better idea the way FDA has allowed.
That's what I'm saying. It's like 10 years, that seems normal. I mean, one of my guests was Dr. Kevin Perot, who was the co-founder of the SENS Research Foundation with Aubrey de Grey.
Right.
And he actually was he was really explaining to me how how everything kind of works. And he's like, yes, I am frustrated. I am definitely frustrated that we're supposed to be reimagining aging 20 years ago and nothing's changed. But he actually has a biomarkers test that I promoted on the show called Open Cures. One of the things, Gordon, that you mentioned is you are knowledgeable to know that you need to look at your genome and, DNA and all of that to see what you're predisposed to. But the average person certainly doesn't. They're in the dark. And the way that the medical system is set up is you have to get sick first for them to treat it when it's too late. So it's not like a preventative system that we are in. So everyone needs to be the CEO of their own health, but they're just not because they just don't know because they go in blindly. So bottom line is yes, if you could do a biomarkers test like Dr. Perot has or something like that, then you can be more knowledgeable and be able to, and they have a consultation to be able to read it. But these types of things, one hand is not speaking to the other. So you said that often there's like everyone's they're very tunnel visioned, they're staying in their lane, but nobody is really looking at the very big picture.
Then come to tomorrow's biomarkers thing 3, just if you have an interest in it, because you're absolutely right.
We're going to be talking about biomarkers
And biological clocks.
That is
what time is that session?
And Linda, you could be the most important person here right now because you are the person who could speak to young people over many, many platforms. And I have no doubt that if we could speak for a moment, I could impart a couple of pieces of old age wisdom, and then you could run with it forever.
Well, I also want to know who is the top of the food chain to speak to, because if we could get the people who are, the billionaires in the biotech in Silicon Valley, if we could have their ear and say to, get them to the right person and who you're saying in Congress.
Very quiet. Jeff Bezos with Larry Ellison. Jeff Bezos just helped establish Altos Labs. They're looking. The Google folks are looking at
right, but they need to connect with who is the person in Congress that can make this, to like start the process.
Yeah. Well, there's no one person, even the president can't make this happen alone. It's going to take a village, in effect, to make it happen in the US and around the world.
Maybe we can look at how the UK did it. How did the UK do it?
I have a simplified answer a little bit. In 2025, there's going to be a Washington conference on aging. Under Obama, I was invited as press. We can talk about you getting invited as press very seriously. That's where the policies on aging for the national government get set. Now, if we can change that from aging to health span and longevity, That's one big shot. It's not the only thing. It's
Well,
one thing.
that's a pretty big transformation, just to
Big
make
transformation.
make clear the distinction between the
Aging well,
and
healthy
helping.
longevity.
Yeah. So we conflate those a little bit, or we can.
But it's a new narrative.
Yeah,
It is.
but
It's a new narrative.
I think the point is it's not a simple solution. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen with one person.
But it hasn't been, I mean, up until like, I mean, even now, like nothing has changed really. Nothing has really, there's not been, think about this, for any of the chronic diseases, there are, from what I know, there are proof of concept cures that are, you know, they're not even able to, you know, get through the next hoop to even see if they work or not. And there's no priority or no urgency or anything. So there has to be something in place. One gentleman, I heard him say, we need to start off from, you know, like start from scratch.
Endorsement on FDA. That's FDA though. He's not talking about.
Well, look, we couldn't agree with you more. We are impatient. We want to make a difference. With your help, the Kitalys Institute and people on the line here can make that difference. As Margaret Mead said, whenever there's been something important to do, it's taken only a few committed people. That's what has worked, and we just need to.
It's only impossible till someone does it. Nike.
Yeah. So,
well, the typical ways that you've been trying to get this done through different, you know, NIA, which was established for this purpose how long ago? And then there was the SENS Research Foundation that was established over 20 years ago. All of these things, like it's not working. So now we have to come up with a different plan.
It's working. It's just going much slower than any of us would want.
Not in our lifetimes. It won't be if we can't get.
Well, believe me, I've got less time than you.
Sure, right.
And we want to make it happen now. So we're with you, believe me. But we got to be realistic. We got to deal with the tough challenges. We need biomarkers. We need.
Ignorance is bliss.
But Linda, I've got to say that you know, tincture of time, and you're young enough now that time has a different metric than when somebody's in their 70s. When I think back to the drugs that I used in 1973 as an intern in St. Louis, they were awful, simple things like blood pressure that we treat so elegantly now. I wouldn't use any of those drugs except the thiazides. They were terrible. Aldameta, Presaline, guanethidine, for heaven.
Serapis.
Yeah, they're terrible. They had blood consequences. And so over time, if you live long enough, you will see that there has actually been. I mean, when a historian looks back, he will say there has been unbelievable
innovation,
progress in the last 50 years. I mean, you know, there were when Hippocrates was practicing 2,000 years ago, they had, quote, 150 drugs at that point. We have thousands of approved drugs that have actually been through all of the rigor that Zan is describing from the FDA, where he used to work, by the way, and where he approved some of, rather boldly, the very first statin, metformin, which is the mainstay of diabetes. He actually was in charge of their approval. So he has actually introduced, I mean, if you think about lives saved, those two actions that he was in charge of, I wouldn't even know how to count the number of millions all through the world.
You're gonna make me cry.
Yeah,
So it isn't totally bleak. That's all I want to leave you with. It's not like we're totally up against a stone wall, but science done right is hard and time consuming. And so I don't know. I take the long view. That and by the way, there is another drug coming for Alzheimer's that so far looks a lot better, and I think that'll be the next step. And that's from a drug. Does somebody remember the name of it? It's from Lilly, and it's the same idea. But
Yeah.
what they did is they engineered the antibodies a little differently to try to deal with the conformation of beta amyloid that most makes those damaging plaques. And just by continuing on the same theme but making incremental changes, it looks like they've got a much better drug.
Well, Gordon, that was such an eloquent statement that I think we need to end right there. That
Oh,
is
no, we can't end there. No.
Thank you, everyone.
Actually, I'd like to say something to Gordon.
We're gonna give you the last word, and we'll look
To
forward.
be continued.
We'll
Right.
continue
Continue
tomorrow.
conversation.
Peter, tomorrow, we're gonna put your feet to the fire. I want that wellness money. I do. I'm telling you that right now.
Linda, come back tomorrow night or tomorrow evening or afternoon for you. We're gonna have a great gathering.
Gala celebration.
And we'll hope to do this in real time next year.
Can I just, this is Claude, can I disclose this one thing about metformin just for my curiosity?
Sure.
It took many, 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 many years to get approved in the United States before Europe. And again, maybe this was a quote somebody told me it was not true, but I heard repeatedly that because of fenformin, the mentality was for many years a biguanide is a biguanide is a biguanide. And the head of the FDA, and I could be wrong, was instrumental in keeping that drug from getting into the United States.
Not exactly, but you're right. It was because of the fenformin disaster.
Sure.
Where a number of people died because
Absolutely.
of that classmate of metformin. And we, when I arrived at FDA, we were actually giving fenformin out to people on special request.
Hypertriglyceridemia, right?
Well, no, it was for a rare dermatologic condition, actually.
Okay, sure.
But the point is, a small company in France brought the data to me, and they said, "Look, this works. It's safe. It's different from fenformin," and we approved it. I had actually a medical officer who strongly agreed and tried to keep it from being approved. We let him speak up at the advisory
Agreed
committee.
or disagreed?
No, he strongly disagreed with approving it. He spoke up at the advisory committee meeting. He wrote articles to the New England Journal that were published saying that this drug should never be approved. But now it is the first line, as you know, the first line therapy for type 2 diabetes. So again, it shows you how sort of conventional wisdom can rule the day for a while, but you have to be driven by the data.
It swings both ways.
And ultimately, we were able to see that the product was not just effective, it was clearly effective, but it was
And
safe.
it didn't have that
It
metformin.
didn't have the risk of ketoacidosis.
And
Yeah,
Claude,
metformin
just so you
doesn't
know,
have that.
biguanides are now
No.
being developed with a hypothesis, sorry, this one, hypothesis that there's a company presenting at the Emerging Company Showcase that thinks that they've named the metabesic target of metformin. So technology rolls on, maybe they're right, maybe they're not right, but this is all fascinating stuff for those of us who are interested in drug development.
So going back to the future to end, I was also a travel writer. I've been to 92 countries, and one of them is Kos, K-O-S. It's an island off the coast of Greece, where Hippocrates had his first hospital. I will tell you that of the 150 remedies he had, the number one was theater. And I hope that this has been
Was
great
what?
theater.
Theater.
I hope that this has been
Entertainment.
great theater for
Yeah,
all.
we had great theater.
As
Thank
I always
you
tell
all.
as I always tell my colleagues, thanks for Galliga officinalis, the French lilac, because
Yeah.
that's the savior.
Yeah, well, thank you all for hanging on this long. It's been so much fun. But come back tomorrow, first thing, and then we'll be back together for another social gathering.
Thank you very much. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you. This was really terrific. This was
Something.
really wonderful. Very
Take
inspirational.
care.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
All right.
Good night.